The Treaty of Trianon in 1920, a brutal carve-up of Hungary by the victorious powers, and is seen as Hungary's tragedy of the 20th century. What is its place in modern Hungary? And is it possible, or even desirable, just to move on? Join me, Darasz, for How We Got Here.
With the crowning of Saint Stephen as the first king of Hungary around the year 1000, the Kingdom of Hungary was formally established. Transitioning from a tribal structure to a Christian monarchy shaped Hungary's identity and bound its fate with Western Christendom, which in turn opened Stephen's kingdom to Western culture, technological development and modes of governance, integrating Hungary into the larger European political and religious landscape. But as the Ottoman Empire brought jihad into Europe, Christian Hungary became a bulwark against the onslaught, repealing the incursions until the Battle of Mohács on August 29, 1526. The slaying of Hungary's King Louis II during the battle left the kingdom kingless and vulnerable to Ottoman conquest. The defeat at Mohács marked the beginning of the fragmentation of Hungary into three parts: the Ottoman-controlled central and southern parts, the Habsburg-controlled western and northern parts, and a semi-independent Principality of Transylvania. The Ottomans' harsh governance over the conquered territories would last for over 150 years. Over the next centuries, the Habsburgs fought several wars against the Ottomans, which gradually resulted in the reconquest of Hungarian territory and the final reclaiming of most of the Ottoman-occupied lands by the early 18th century. By force of the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1869, Hungary was granted a degree of autonomy within the empire, very much an illusion of autonomy, as Hungary remained tightly controlled by the Habsburgs in key areas. After World War I and the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Hungary lost two-thirds of its territory in the Treaty of Trianon. The trauma of losing vast lands, including areas with significant Hungarian populations, created lasting political and social divisions. This event continues to affect Hungarian national identity and is eagerly exploited by Viktor Orbán's ruling party Fidesz when pushing through its political agenda. The Trianon trauma encouraged Hungary under Regent Miklós Horthy to join the Axis powers during World War II, aligning itself with Nazi Germany. Despite this alliance, Hungary was reluctant to fully embrace Nazi policies, and in 1939 Hungary helped the Polish government in exile and allowed refugees to pass through its territory. In fact, the Hungarian-Polish bond dates back to medieval times, when the two countries shared common interests and enemies. The bond was solidified during times of war, such as the joint resistance against the Ottoman Empire. The amicable relations uniting Hungary and Poland even earned a proverbial saying, "Poland-Hungarian brothers be." After the war, Hungary fell within the Soviet sphere of influence, resulting in a long period of communist control, which fundamentally altered Hungary's political and social fabric. But following Stalin's death in 1953 and the ensuing thaw, Hungarians rose against their Soviet-imposed communist regime. What began as a student protest escalated into an armed uprising. Soviet forces initially withdrew, but later returned and crushed the rebellion. In the aftermath of the revolution, Hungary experienced a more relaxed form of communism under János Kádár, known as Goulash communism. This period saw some economic reforms, greater consumer goods availability, and slightly more political openness, but it was still a one-party system under Soviet influence. In 1989, amid the crumbling of the Soviet Union and communism in Europe, Hungary became one of the first countries to peacefully transition to a multi-party democracy, marking a significant shift away from communist rule. The country held its first free elections in 1990, and Hungary became a member of the European Union in 2004. Despite the political shift, some critics argue that Hungary's transition was not as deep or meaningful as it seemed. Economic challenges, political instability, and the rise of nationalist movements have complicated the democratic process. In recent years, under Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, Hungary has been accused of backsliding on democratic principles, with concerns about the erosion of press freedom, judicial independence, and the rule of law. I'm delighted to be joined today by Andrzej Sadecki.
He is the head of the Central European Department at the Centre for Eastern Studies in Warsaw. Welcome to the programme.
Hello.
We've got a whistle-stop tour of Hungarian history in the clip. Let's go right back to the origins of the Hungarian state and its dissolution in the 16th century. And how did that affect the Hungarian mentality, at least historically?
Mm-hmm. So the Hungarian history is not very different from the history of other Central European countries. It started, as we saw a moment ago, with the establishment of the kingdom, roughly 1,000 years ago, adoption of Christianity, which was interesting because Hungarians actually, as people, their origins is in the east, close to the Urali mountains. So in Hungarian identity, there is always this kind of mixture of Western and Eastern elements. So obviously they developed as a Christian nation, adopt the Western Christianity.
They suffered Mongol invasions as well before.
Yes, but at the same time, they always cherished the sort of tribal past, referring to pagan symbols, etc. So it goes on until today. And the first big threat for the kingdom was exactly the Ottoman invasion. First, there were some glorious victories of Hungarian army against the Ottomans, the Battle of Belgrade, etc. And then came the great defeat in Mohács, which actually put an end to the Hungarian statehood for over 300 years.
And was that a result of a military defeat, a staggering military defeat, that the whole army was almost wiped out in the battle? Or was it a result of also internal divisions within the kingdom itself? How do you...
Well, it was mainly a military defeat. Actually, in the period following to the battle, there was basically a golden age of Hungary, the times where the culture was developing, economy. It was a moment when Renaissance took foot in Hungary, and it actually ended this sort of first golden age of Hungary. Of course, there were divisions, there were always struggles between the nobility and the king, and how the power is actually shared. That's one of the features of Hungarian society of the era, that big part, well, much larger part than in Western Europe, was part of the nobility, up to 10%. But this defeat is remembered as sort of a major tragedy for the nation, as it led to the the loss of the statehood for centuries.
And was this a memory that was cherished by the Hungarian elites, rather than in the similar way that the partitions of Poland, Lithuania were cherished by Polish-Lithuanian elites?
Well, definitely, and there are also some similarities between the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the Hungarian kingdom. They were both large multinational kingdoms. They were both at risk of foreign invasions. Actually, the Turks were the sort of joint enemy of the era. So here, actually, the Mohács battle, we will be seeing the 500th anniversary next year. So it will be interesting how it is actually remembered today. But for a long time, it was a symbol of the Hungarian defeat.
Is it seen as I suppose in today's ideological political correctness, is it seen as a typical anti-Islamic European phenomenon? Is there any lasting legacy that was positive in Hungary? The Muslim presence lasted for a century and a half. Was there anything that was taken from that and almost viewed as a positive development? Or is it all negative, an invader, an occupier?
Well, in Hungarian language you have a lot of words coming from the Turkish language. So there is a legacy. There are monuments all over Hungary, in Pécs, in Eger, reminding of these times. And I would say currently, of course, there is this idea of defending Europe against the foreign invasion, also foreign culture, foreign religion. And it was a little bit revived during the 2015 migration crisis, where again Hungary presented itself as a bulwark of Western civilization. On the other hand, there is no bad kind of feeling towards the Turks. Certainly, the kids at school they read a novel about the siege of Eger, and it's somehow present in the memory. But on the other hand, currently there are no actually. I mean, Turkey is not seen as an enemy. Even if you go to the seat of the Battle of Szigetvár, you can find a park of Hungarian-Turkish friendship, and it was a place where a nobleman and General Miklos Zrínyi fought against the Suleiman the Magnificent, where actually Suleiman has died in the battle. So a symbol of the struggle from 500 years ago is today a symbol of actually friendship.
Fast forwarding now to the mid-19th century, is it fair to describe the union between, or is it a union between Austria and Hungary? It's the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so the implication is that it was an equal partner in this. Is that accurate? And is that seen as a second golden age, where, as you mentioned, Hungary became a kingdom within an empire, but had this another multinational character? How is it regarded that today?
Hungarians were struggling against the Habsburg for centuries. There were uprisings, there were several attempts, with the notable example of the 1848 Spring of Nations revolution in Budapest that turned into a nationwide uprising. But actually, fast forward 20 years, there was the Great Compromise, and indeed, Hungary became almost independent. I mean, the emperor was also the king of Hungary, the emperor of Austria. But actually, the both parts of the monarchy shared only the military and the foreign affairs. Almost all the other issues were divided. So indeed, it is considered as the sort of second golden age of Hungary. It was a time of industrialization, development of culture. But on the other hand, there are already seeds of the future problems, because the Hungarian part of the monarchy was multinational. Hungarians constituted roughly a half of the population, so there were the aspirations of the minorities that already became visible during the revolution of 1848, and then finally led to the end of the Kingdom of Hungary in the form it had before.
A final question to you before we move on to our next clip, which will bring us on to the Treaty of Trianon. Why was Austria-Hungary obviously collapsed in 1918? Why was Hungary in particular treated seemingly so brutally by France and Britain in these Paris treaties? It seemed to have got a raw deal than did Germany, for example.
Well, it's a bit of a paradox, because during 1848 revolution, Hungarians had basically sympathy of the whole Europe, right? I mean, especially the liberal cause of, you know, fighting against the oppression, against the monarchy. Yes. And fast forward 70 years, they were seen as a nation that oppressed their minorities, although it wasn't very different in many European countries of the epoch, but nonetheless, if you read the British press, it was all over. You know, you had stories about the repressions of Romanians, Slovaks, etc. Second, there were considerations of these victorious countries that actually it would be better to dismember Austro-Hungary, even if they came to the decision quite late during the First World War. But it was a conclusion that there is no place anymore for this big multinational state in the middle of Europe, also because Austria-Hungary was in the alliance with the losing German power.
And as we come up to the Second World War, was this one of the constituent, this revanchist foreign policy by Admiral Horthy, was that a key figure in, or a key factor in this alliance with Imperial Germany, the Third Reich, to get these territories back?
Well, definitely. I mean, after the Treaty of Trianon of 1920 that deprived Hungary of 2/3 of its territory, the main goal of the interwar regime was to regain these lands. I mean, the revisionist, the irredentist idea became predominant also in culture, in press, in politics, everywhere. And it all led to the alliance with the Nazi Germany.
Before we move on to the second part of our discussion, first of all, we'll have a look at our clip.
The following are the words from the speech Viktor Orbán gave on June 16, 1989.
If we keep our eyes on the ideas of 1956, we can choose a government for ourselves that starts immediate negotiations, that begins with the immediate withdrawal of Russian troops.
His speech catapulted him into a position of a national hero and the leader of pro-democracy activists at the time of the crumbling Soviet Union. His education at Oxford, a significant portfolio upgrade, rendered possible thanks to no other than George Soros's Open Society Foundation, bore impressive fruit. Having chipped into the establishment of Fidesz, aka the Alliance of Young Democrats, Soros, the Hungarian-born billionaire and philanthropist, could have been proud of his young protégé, for the time being at least. After losing the 2022 election, Orbán rebranded himself as a nationalist. Following his return to power in 2010, he rewrote the constitution so that it lowered the retirement age for judges, forcing out independent judges and replacing them with Fidesz loyalists. The Constitutional Court's powers were reduced, and judges were handpicked by a Fidesz-dominated parliament. The party redesigned electoral districts to favor itself. A media law passed in 2011 created a government-controlled media council, which could fine and censor journalists for unbalanced reporting. By 2020, over 80% of Hungarian media was owned or controlled by government-friendly oligarchs. Orbán has cracked down on NGOs, opposition parties, and academic institutions critical of his government. In 2017, a law was passed forcing NGOs receiving foreign funding to register as foreign agents, echoing Putin-style repression. The EU did not take liking to Orbán's policies that often failed to meet the bloc's standards. In 2021, the EU sued Hungary for Fidesz's anti-LGBTQ+ policies in 2021. His government has been using the Pegasus spyware to monitor journalists and opposition figures. Since 2022, the EU has blocked or suspended billions of euro in funding to Hungary owing to Orbán's cronyism. Where international relations are concerned, Orbán has been maintaining close ties with Russia's leader Vladimir Putin. In 2021, Hungary signed a 15-year gas deal with Gazprom, securing 4.5 billion cubic meters of Russian gas per year. Despite EU sanctions and the invasion of Ukraine, Hungary continues to buy Russian gas at favorable prices.
Our clip there concentrated on the biography, the political biography of Viktor Orbán. We're going to discuss the impact of Trianon on modern Hungary. he, at the beginning of the clip, he mentioned 1956 rather than 1920. And in your very interesting paper that you wrote on the impact of Trianon, you mentioned that most Hungarians regard the territorial losses of 1920 as the greatest tragedy in Hungarian history, but yet it's not that important to get these lands back or to have this revanchist foreign policy. It seems to be a paradoxical view that Hungarians take of this episode in their history.
Well, the Treaty of Trianon is widely seen as the biggest tragedy of Hungarian history, and it has very difficult legacy because it's a symbol of defeat, a symbol of loss of land. Of course, it
External
followed
powers grabbing and carving up Hungary.
It followed defeat in the war, but it's also a symbol of the kind of other countries deciding over the heads of the nation. And there is no easy answer to it because in contemporary Europe, I mean, the changes of borders are basically out of question. So this is a trauma that is difficult to process, and it was after the Treaty Trianon was signed, as we said before, it was the major topic during the whole interwar period. Then Hungary lost another world war, was on the losing side. And then the issue became completely wiped out from the debate.
It's a taboo subject under the communists.
Yeah, and then it came back after 1989. It was already free to discuss, although it was difficult to decide for the politicians what to do with it. I mean, Hungary embarked on its road to the EU and NATO. Hungary wanted to transform itself, so one of the requirements was to establish good relations with the neighbors, so kind of embark on the reconciliation process. But on the other hand, there were still large minorities of Hungarians living in the neighboring countries. So the last 30 years, it's a kind of attempt to find a balance of how to have good relations with the neighbors, but at the same time, support the Hungarian minorities in these countries, and sometimes it was leading to tensions between Hungary and Romania, Slovakia, Ukraine, and other countries.
How does Viktor Orbán, as the current Prime Minister, play this question? It's a very emotive question for Hungarians. It's a very bitter experience that they had to, still in folk memory, I suppose. Is it true to say that he's instrumentalized this for political purposes, or is that a simplistic thing to say?
Well, definitely when Orbán took power 15 years ago, I think he was correct in reading that there is a need in society for kind of referring to the historical issues and to identity. And in this way, he kind of understood the popular emotion there. But his response was often to instrumentalize these emotions to his own political purposes. So regarding Trianon, certainly the change was that the Hungarian state gave the citizenship to all these all the Hungarian minorities in the neighboring countries, especially Romania, where about 1 million of Hungarians live. If you compare it to the 10 million Hungarian population, it's a quite significant number. So there was this idea of the national unity beyond the borders, which of course raised some eyebrows among the neighboring countries, whether it's not a form of sort of soft irredentism, right?
Yes.
But he respected
Poland
the borders.
Has these problems as well, I suppose.
Yes. So, but then, especially around the 100th anniversary of Trianon, the centenary, which is always an opportunity to revive and discuss what happened. He started to strongly instrumentalize to show that Hungary was badly treated in Trianon, and it is badly treated by Brussels, international media, other Western actors nowadays, which is of course far-fetched, and it's difficult to compare these two situations. So,
but does it strike a chord with Hungarians?
I think so, partly. Of course, Hungarians, as many other societies currently in Europe, are very divided, and Orbán has strong fans and people that basically would like to get rid of him as soon as possible. So here it's contentious, obviously, but he was able to somehow instrumentalize it. On the other hand, a bigger emphasis in the public discourse was on other events, such as 1956. As this was a revolution that Orbán could more build like a pride of Hungarians, that they fought against something. Of course, the revolution...
a resurgence of the nation as well.
Yes, the revolution ended in a defeat, but at the same time, it was easier to show it to this society as a kind of unifying element than Trianon, which is simply a defeat. So in this sense, he was building on it, but also instrumentalizing it, not really emphasizing the Russian element to it, the fact that the revolution was crushed by the Soviet Union, but mostly interpreting it as a kind of historical chain of Hungarian struggles for freedom, which now has its own manifestation with the struggle against Brussels.
Fascinating discussion. We have to leave it there. Andrzej Sadecki, thank you very much for coming onto the programme.
Thank you for having me.
That's it. That's all we have time for today, unfortunately. Join us again next time. You know the time. That's Tuesday, 9:35 p.m. CET, 21:35. So do join us then.